There are sentences that end wars, there are sentences that start them, and then there are sentences that, when a sitting president says them out loud in the middle of an active military conflict, quietly detonate against the legal and moral foundation of the entire operation without anyone in the room fully absorbing what just happened. Donald Trump said one of those sentences on Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026, during a press conference with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in the Oval Office. A reporter asked whether Israel had pulled the United States into the war with Iran. Trump shook his head and said, "No, if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand." 7 words. Read them again slowly because every single one matters. Not that America followed Israel, not that Israel dragged America, not that Netanyahu pressured Trump. Trump said the reverse might be true, that he was the one who moved first, that Israel was ready and he was ready, and that if the pressure ran in any direction between the two governments, it ran from Washington to Jerusalem rather than the other way around. And then he added, in the same breath, that the whole reason was because Iran was going to attack first. 7 words that rewrote the history of how this war began. 7 words that directly contradict what his Secretary of State had told Congress 24 hours earlier. 7 words that immediately became the most consequential thing said publicly about this conflict since the first bomb fell on February 28th. To understand why these 7 words matter so much, you need to start not with Trump on Tuesday, but with Marco Rubio on Monday. Because Rubio's Monday statement is the ignition source for everything that followed. Rubio was in the Capitol, briefing members of Congress about the intelligence basis for Operation Epic Fury. He stood in a corridor with reporters and, in the careful language of a former senator who knows exactly what he is saying and exactly what it means legally and constitutionally, offered this explanation for why the United States entered the war with Iran. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher number of those killed. Read that 3 times. Rubio did not say Iran was about to attack the United States. Rubio did not say American intelligence had identified an imminent Iranian threat to American forces. Rubio said the United States attacked Iran preemptively because Israel was going to attack Iran, and a U.S.-Israeli joint strike would produce fewer American casualties than letting Israel go first and then entering the conflict reactively. The justification for the war, in the Secretary of State's own words, was not Iranian aggression against America. It was Israeli planned action that America chose to join in order to better manage the consequences for American forces. That is a fundamentally different legal and moral claim from the one Trump made on Saturday morning when he announced Operation Epic Fury and said the United States had concluded Iran was preparing an attack that would result in far higher U.S. casualties if preempted. Trump said the threat was from Iran. Rubio said the trigger was from Israel. They cannot both be the primary explanation. And when they are placed side by side, the question of who started this war, which seemed settled by the confident language of Saturday's announcement, becomes something considerably more complicated and considerably more dangerous. Senator Angus King of Maine, who caucuses with Democrats and serves on the Senate Intelligence Committee, was at the Armed Services Committee hearing on Tuesday when Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby appeared to testify about the administration's national defense strategy. King read Rubio's Monday statement aloud into the Senate record. We knew there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties. And then asked Colby a single question that has hung over this entire conflict since the first strike package was authorized. Have we now delegated the most solemn decision that can be made in our society, the decision to go to war, to another country? Senator King later told reporters that Rubio had inadvertently told the truth. He said he supports Israel, has supported Israel throughout his career, but that no foreign government should be the trigger for an American decision to go to war. The distinction King is drawing is not anti-Israel. It is constitutional. The United States Constitution vests the power to declare war in Congress. Congress has not declared war on Iran. The 2001 authorization for use of military force, which Congress wrote after September 11th specifically to address threats connected to al-Qaeda and the 9/11 attacks, does not cover Iran. Senator Tim Kaine, the lead sponsor of the Senate's War Powers Resolution Bill, confirmed this explicitly during the same hearing. The president has not cited that, Kaine said of the 2001 AUMF. And we all agree that Iran was not covered by the 01 AUMF. What this means, in the plainest terms, is that Operation Epic Fury, the largest American air campaign since the 1991 Gulf War, the operation that has killed at least 787 Iranians according to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, killed 6 American service members, struck more than 1,000 targets across Iran, and produced strikes on the U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia and closed 3 American embassies across the Middle East, is being conducted without a congressional declaration of war, without an applicable authorization for the use of military force, and now, following Rubio's Monday statement, with a publicly stated justification that the Secretary of State offered, which places the decision trigger not in Iranian aggression against the United States, but in anticipated Israeli military action. Kaney said the anxiety Republicans were feeling about voting for an AUMF was itself evidence about whether this was a good idea. If you're nervous about voting for the war, he told reporters, well then, think what that says to the troops who are risking their lives. Now Trump's Tuesday sentence comes back into focus because it was a direct attempt to answer the political crisis that Rubio's Monday statement had created. Rubio said we followed Israel's lead. That sentence, as NBC reporter Hallie Jackson put it in her post, was basically the worst possible thing he could have said, echoing the reaction of the administration's own allies. The political cost of Rubio's framing was immediate and cross-partisan. On the left, Democrats who had been cautious about directly attacking the war's legal basis had been handed a Secretary of State's own testimony that the decision to go to war was, in material terms, conditioned on Israeli planning. On the right, and this is the dimension that the administration could not afford to ignore, the MAGA base fractured in a way that no amount of flag-waving messaging could paper over. Tucker Carlson, the former Fox primetime host who had spent weeks before the strikes warning explicitly against American involvement, went on his podcast Monday and said what a substantial portion of Trump's populist base was already thinking. This is Israel's war. This is not the United States' war. This war is not being waged on behalf of American national security objectives to make it safer or richer. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had already been publicly criticizing Trump's war before Rubio's statement landed, went on the Megyn Kelly show Monday and escalated. Make America Great Again was supposed to be America first, not Israel first, not any foreign country first, not any foreign people first, but the American people first. Greene called for a serious national conversation about who is making these decisions and for whom. Steve Bannon, whose podcast has been one of the most consistent voices of populist nationalism in Trump's coalition, had been warning for weeks before the strikes that Israel was trying to drag the United States into a conflict. Now, Rubio had, in the view of this faction, confirmed it. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt went on X on Sunday night to push back on the criticism, listing Operation Epic Fury's stated objectives and defending the president's Saturday announcement. But the damage from Rubio's Monday statement was not addressable by a press secretary's post. It required the president himself to speak. And on Tuesday morning, with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz sitting next to him in the Oval Office, Trump spoke. No, if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. Understand the political mechanics of what Trump was doing with that sentence and why it simultaneously solved one problem and created 2 others. The political problem it solved, it repositioned Trump as the initiator, the decisive actor, the man who moved first, rather than the man who was moved by a foreign government. America first, in Trump's retelling, means Trump was the one who pulled Israel toward the strike, not the other way around. Israel didn't drag America. America, in the person of Donald Trump, decided it was time and brought Israel along. This narrative restores Trump's agency. It recasts the story from Netanyahu's war that America joined into Trump's war that Israel supported. That is a politically sustainable position for Trump's base in a way that Rubio's framing was not. The MAGA voters who are comfortable with a Trump-led assertion of American power are far more comfortable with that narrative than with the narrative that Israel's planned military action was the operational trigger. The political problem it created, if Trump forced Israel's hand, then the imminent Iranian threat justification, the argument that America attacked preemptively because Iran was going to attack first, becomes secondary to a decision that appears to have been made on the basis of the Geneva talks collapsing and a judgment that the time was right, not on the basis of specific intelligence indicating imminent Iranian aggression against American forces. And the Pentagon, according to Just Security's reporting source to Politico, had already told Congress in its notification under the War Powers Resolution that no such specific intelligence existed, that the strikes were justified on the basis of a general threat assessment rather than specific evidence of imminent attack on American forces. No evidence was provided, Senator Mark Warner, vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said on CNN over the weekend. Warner told CNN he had seen no intelligence, that Iran was on the verge of launching any kind of preemptive strike. Trump called Iran's leaders lunatics and mentally ill sick people on Tuesday. They're sick people, they're angry, they're crazy. But anger and mental illness are not the legal standard for preemptive military action under international law or the War Powers Resolution. Imminent threat is the standard. And when Trump says he might have forced Israel's hand, he is describing a decision made on the basis of strategic judgment, not imminent threat. Here's where Steve Witkoff becomes essential to the script that the administration is trying to write about why this war happened, because Witkoff's Fox News interview on Tuesday is the administration's most detailed public account of what the Geneva negotiations actually produced and why they failed. Witkoff described the scene with a precision that was clearly designed to leave no ambiguity. In that first meeting, both Iranian negotiators said to us directly, with no shame, that they controlled 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and they're aware that that could make 11 nuclear bombs, and that was the beginning of their negotiating stance. So they were proud of it. They were proud that they had evaded all sorts of oversight protocols to get to a place where they could deliver 11 nuclear bombs. Witkoff described Iranian negotiators insisting on an inalienable right to enrich all their nuclear fuel. He described the U.S. offering to provide nuclear fuel to Iran for a decade on the condition it was not weaponized, an offer Iran rejected, which Witkoff said told them at that very moment that they had no notion of doing anything other than retaining enrichment for the purpose of weaponizing. He described Araghchi shouting at the Thursday Geneva session when the U.S. reiterated its demand for a 10-year halt to enrichment, with Witkoff calmly offering to leave if Araghchi preferred. He said by the end of the second meeting, it was very, very clear. A deal was going to be impossible, but they went back for a third meeting anyway, which, as Axios reported separately, was partly designed to keep the Iranians believing diplomacy was still the primary path, while the operational window for the strikes was being finalized. Witkoff, to his credit, was more direct in this Fox interview than the administration has been in any other venue about how the negotiations actually ended, not with a dramatic breakdown, but with a gradual accumulation of evidence that no deal was possible, followed by a decision that force was the alternative. He said Trump had almost certainly made the decision to go with military force when the Iranians rejected the offer of U.S.-supplied nuclear fuel for a decade. That was our most generous proposal. When they rejected it, we knew. He said Trump was surprised by the Iranian stance at Geneva, a detail sourced to NBC News, which raises its own question. If the president was surprised by Iran's negotiating position at the Geneva talks, does that suggest the decision to go to war was not based on a long-standing assessment of Iranian intransigence, but on a relatively rapid pivot from surprise to military action? The IAEA's position adds another layer that no one in the administration's public framing has adequately engaged. When CNN's chief international anchor asked IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi on Tuesday whether Iran was days or weeks away from building a bomb, Grossi said no. He described Iran's nuclear program after last June's strikes as very slow, perhaps we could say frozen, if not almost stopped. Trump had told reporters that Iran would have had a nuclear weapon within 1 month had the strikes not been launched. Netanyahu told Fox News that Iran was rebuilding new underground sites and its nuclear program would have been immune in months without immediate action. Grossi said no to all of it. The international community's most senior nuclear watchdog, the person with actual inspection access to Iran's nuclear facilities, access that, it should be noted, Iran had suspended since June 2025, said on camera that Iran was not about to produce a nuclear weapon imminently. And yet the administration's public justification for the most significant American military action in more than 2 decades rests substantially on exactly that claim. The gap between what Grossi said and what Trump and Netanyahu said is not a minor definitional difference. It is the gap between a genuine imminent threat and a strategic choice made under time pressure and the legal and moral weight of Operation Epic Fury sits entirely on which side of that gap the truth is actually located. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, the same man who was shouting at Steve Witkoff in Geneva less than a week ago, read Rubio's Monday statement and posted on X with a directness that was apparently intended to land as a weapon inside American domestic politics. Mr. Rubio admitted what we all knew. The U.S. has entered a war of choice on behalf of Israel. There was never any so-called Iranian threat. Shedding of both American and Iranian blood is thus on Israel firsters. American people deserve better and should take back their country. The phrase Israel firsters is not accidental language from an Iranian foreign minister. It is a specific rhetorical weapon aimed directly at the fracture line in Trump's coalition that Rubio's Monday statement had already cracked open. Araghchi is not writing for CNN or the New York Times. He is writing for Tucker Carlson's audience, for Steve Bannon's listeners, for the segment of MAGA voters who spent years rallying behind America First, and who are now watching Tucker Carlson say, this is Israel's war, not America's war, and finding that it resonates. Iran's information strategy in this conflict is not only military, it is political. And on Tuesday, March 3rd, it found its most effective instrument not in a missile or a drone, but in a Secretary of State's offhand candor about what actually triggered American entry into the war. The question that Senator Angus King asked Elbridge Colby, Have we delegated the most solemn decision that can be made in our society to another country? It does not have a clean answer in the public record. Colby pushed back. He said Trump made the decision. King replied, well, he made the decision, but it appeared to be based upon the fact that Israel was going to strike. That exchange is, in miniature, the entire constitutional and political problem of Operation Epic Fury compressed into 2 sentences. If Trump made the decision, the war is legal by executive prerogative, but it still lacks congressional authorization, and the imminent threat justification is contested. If the decision was structured around Israeli planning, the war's original justification, imminent Iranian aggression against American forces, was either subordinate to Israeli timing or was not the primary driver at all. And if Trump forced Israel's hand, as he said Tuesday, then the decision belongs entirely to Trump, which makes it simultaneously the most politically useful claim for his domestic audience and the most legally exposed claim in terms of what it says about whether an imminent threat existed. You cannot simultaneously have forced Israel's hand and been responding to an imminent Iranian threat. Those 2 explanations require different timelines, different decision structures, and different moral frameworks. They cannot both be fully true. And on Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026, the President of the United States publicly offered both of them within hours of each other as explanations for why this war began. There is a soldier somewhere in the United States right now whose family received the notification that the Department of Defense had confirmed 6 American service member deaths in the first 4 days of Operation Epic Fury. 3 killed in Kuwait in an Iranian strike, others in Bahrain and the UAE. They were told their family member died in defense of American national security. They were told the war was necessary to stop an imminent threat. They did not receive an explanation that said, we knew Israel was going to strike, and we joined in order to manage the casualty calculus. They did not receive an explanation that said, the president may have forced Israel's hand. They received the flag and the condolences. The explanation of why their family member's life was exchanged for this operation, the specific, honest, legally and morally defensible answer to why this particular war started on this particular night, is a question that 7 words spoken in the Oval Office on Tuesday made considerably harder to answer cleanly. If anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. That sentence does not end the debate about who started this war. It opens it in a new direction. And that direction leads into a set of questions about constitutional authority, strategic justification, and the relationship between American military commitment and Israeli strategic interest that this country has never formally and publicly confronted, and that this war is now making impossible to avoid. The bombs are still falling. The 6 embassies are still closed. The Strait of Hormuz has been declared shut. 6 American families are burying their dead. And the question of who exactly decided that this moment was the right moment for the most significant American military action in a generation, and on whose timetable and for whose interests, and with whose constitutional authority, is now being debated simultaneously in the Oval Office, the Senate Armed Services Committee, Tucker Carlson's podcast, and an Iranian foreign minister's X account. 7 words opened all of it. I might have forced Israel's hand. What comes out of that opening will shape how this war is remembered, how it ends and what it costs in lives and in the credibility of the justifications that sent those lives into harm's way.